Hello, Seaside Shadows, and welcome to Cemetery Saturday. It is your ghost hostess, Courtney, today, and I am standing in the beautiful Cedar Grove Cemetery in New London, Connecticut. Now, we came here almost a full year ago for one of our very first Cemetery Saturdays, where we introduced you to a revolutionary couple named the Hinmans. And today, we're going to introduce you to someone from a different war, and oddly, not of the side that you may think would be buried here in New London, Connecticut. So lately, I have been working on a new book about the Civil War and the men from Connecticut. And one of the most fascinating things came to light during this research. And the fascinating thing that came to light was that a Confederate, yes, a Confederate general is buried right here in New London at Cedar Grove. And I am standing with him today, Major General of the Confederate States of America, Gustavus W. Smith. He is buried here, and he is buried with his wife, Lucretia. It says that her name is right there, of the Bassett family. Now, the Bassett family was a New London family, and they were well known whalers and merchants of the region. They were prominent and had a great deal of money. So, how does this Confederate general come to meet Lucretia Bassett and be here? Well, to tell you that story means to take you back to before the Civil War. Now, Gustavus was a Kentucky native, Kentucky being a border state between Confederate and Union during the Civil War, meaning they were one of a handful of states that were split on the matter and had some of their residents fighting for the Union and others fighting for the Confederacy. Now, before this time, Gustavus being a Southern gentleman, he did have military aspirations, and he was quite academically inclined and intelligent. So, as a young man, he enrolled at West Point in New York. In a class of 56, he graduated eighth in his class, which was pretty acclaimed at the time. And then he was placed in a Corps of Engineers. Now, the Corps of Engineers had a variety of placements. His included, of course, fighting in the Mexican-American War, as so many generals that would fight for the Union and Confederate would fight in, as would other officers in the Civil War. And he did fight in two battles there, receiving even some injuries. However, it was his placement at Fort Trumbull in New London. Now, you may remember Fort Trumbull was just a moderate fort during the Revolutionary War. Fort Griswold on the Groton side of the Thames River here being the more prominent fort at the time. But Fort Trumbull had to be built into the beautiful military structure that it is today. And a lot of that building happened during the Civil War. And for that building, you would need engineers. So Gustavus Smith, as an engineer before the Civil War, gets placed in New London, and he's helping with the construction of Fort Trumbull, which is later going to be a meeting point for Union soldiers and training place, though he would have no idea of this at the time. When he's living in New London, he meets Lucretia Bassett. They fall in love and they marry. This is in the 1850s. So they have nearly a decade together before the war starts to take place. Maybe closer to 6 to 7 years. A decade's a bit generous. When the war takes place, he decides that he sides with the Confederacy. He's going to back the region that he's from in Kentucky, and he gets a series of placements there. Now, he already received 2 promotions in the Mexican-American War, and he graduated as a lieutenant, and he's already been moved up the lieutenant ranks in the Mexican-American War. And it's during the Civil War that he's going to be moved up the ranks to Major General. Now, he does survive the Civil War, seeing quite a bit of battle outside Petersburg and in the Battle of the Seven Pines. And that's where he's really aggressively involved. But there starts to become some problems, even though they're not incredibly well documented in Connecticut history. But we know that there's problems because his wife, Lucretia, Lucretia finds herself in Savannah, Georgia. She, being from a Union territory and a Union family, is in need of aid because it seems that people are looking to come after her in some way. So she approaches the general of the Union Army, one of the prominent ones, not, of course, Ulysses, but maybe next in command, General William Tecumseh Sherman, who is on his famous march to the sea. He's found himself in Savannah, and Lucretia goes to him and asks for aid and for protection for her and her family. Sherman is so taken with her and finds her to be quite charming. Perhaps he finds her beautiful, but he notes that she is a lovely lady and that he is going to provide aid for her, and he's going to make sure that she and her family are taken care of so that no harm comes to the Bassetts and, by default, Gustavus Smith. Now, Gustavus Smith, of course, is on the losing side of the Civil War. The Confederate officers and soldiers, many of them are captured at the end of the war, or some of them would even be held to trial in rare occurrences. Gustavus was paroled in 1865 from his participation, and he was released to go back home, where he lived a rather quiet life. Now, he wrote several books, but he did not come back here to Connecticut for that quiet life when he was writing books and working as an engineer and in a variety of jobs. Rather, he lived in New York City, and that is where he died, and his body was brought back here to be buried with his wife in her family plot, the Bassett plot. So though his time in New London was brief, his body being here has caused quite a stir. You see, it's a strange thing for a Connecticut resident to think of a Confederate general being buried right here. And as such, the Bassetts knew that that was a strange thing. And even though he was brought here after his death in New York City, he did not have this grave. You can tell by looking at the grave that it's more modern and its build than the historic ones around it in the Bassett family plot with this beautiful obelisk. And the reason for that is because this was not put here until the late 1900s, the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s. There were descendants of Gustavus Smith and Lucretia Bassett who were advocating for this memorial to be built in his honor. Now, that was, of course, a conundrum, and it made national news when writers who were writing about the Civil War, saying that they were impartial on the matter, they just believed that everyone deserved a grave marker, started advocating for Gustavus to have one. Eventually, the descendants did build this marker for the Major General of the Confederate States. And as the years went on, they started putting Confederate flags here as well. As you can see, the Confederate flags have been removed. There's still a bit of debate as to if that was ever the right decision, but his family chose to have him in an unmarked grave. It was his descendants that put the grave here years later. Now, Gustavus did lead that peaceful life. He wrote about war tactics and seemingly did accept peacefully the win of the Union, which was the goal of generals like Ulysses S. Grant, who would become president, to give them this idea of almost a soft loss so that they would accommodate. And Robert E. Lee himself even said that when the war was over, it was over and the Union won. And so they would go on to lead these lives and become one country. And that, my friends, would explain why perhaps it's just all right that he has a grave marker here, as he went on to accept that country as well and continue to provide for it. So if you're strolling through New London and you find yourself a little bit baffled by the fact that there's a Confederate general here, he fell in love with a Yankee lady, and that's how he came to be here. Thank you for joining us on this Cemetery Saturday. We hope that this was a fun one for you. We will also bring to you, of course, some Union soldiers that you can meet in the area as well, of which there are so many heroes. And we'll introduce you continually to unique figures throughout our state as we continue in this series. We thank you so much for your continued support of our video segments. We hope and encourage you to like and share them so more people can find out about us. We also have a Patreon where for just $5 a month, you can subscribe and get a story that is not shared publicly on any of our social media, that's exclusively emailed to you. And that story is a spooky story more often than not that is sent to you so that you can enjoy that. And our Patreon has lots lots of other benefits at different tiers as well. Our tours are coming back. They're coming back. They're coming back. Starting March 12th, you will see that we will have weekends available. By April, we'll be going out 4 days a week. And by the time summer rolls around, you'll have a plethora of tours to choose from. So we can't wait to spook you soon. Stay safe, stay warm, and thank you for joining us.